First of all, I'm very grateful to the regional government of Extremadura and also UN Habitat for the invitation to this conference. It is very, very important because it brings different levels of governments and also experts to discuss together the issue of affordable housing, because affordable housing is a very integrated issue, so it cannot be resolved separately by one authority or by one ministry. It has to be done together by different ministries, but also in cooperation between regional, local authorities, national governments. And this conference is really an excellent example of how this cooperation taking place in Spain. This is very important to integrate these issues relating to housing policy, and the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development of the UN is a very important instrument to support the development of policies for housing affordability. I'm Secretary to the Committee on Housing Land Management of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and we are working very closely with our national governments, but also more in cooperation with the local governments, to promote access to affordable, decent housing. It became a really important topic and really big challenge for the governments, but also for people living in Europe, in the wider Europe. And in 2015, the 56 governments, also Spain, endorsed a very important document, Geneva UN Charter on Sustainable Housing. This document basically is saying that it's very important to look at the housing in a very integrated way, to look at the issues of the social cohesion, to look into the environmental sustainability, climate neutrality of housing, to look into the cultural adequacy of the housing, and of course to look into the economics of the housing. And economics of the housing is very important because today, after the financial crisis of 2008, it's really very difficult for public authorities alone to finance the access to affordable housing. So it is very important to develop cooperation between governments, but also with the private sector through the public-private partnerships, so that to ensure that we have high investments into the affordable housing. And there are many interesting examples across Europe, and we at the UNEC will be really happy to share different best practices in different countries. Environmental sustainability is another very important topic because buildings provide 40% of the carbon emissions out of all different infrastructure. And this is why we need to work together while we are ensuring that the housing is affordable to different groups of population. At the same time, also it's environmentally sustainable. So it means that we should promote energy efficiency of the housing, but also we promote the design which helps us to make this housing more environmentally sustainable. Finally, I think it's very, very important that all the vulnerable groups are actually included into the discussion of the affordability of housing, and also we make sure that we provide housing to all vulnerable groups, to young people, to old people, to people with disabilities, to people who are migrating. So this is important that all these groups are really receives access to affordable housing, but also they are involved in the discussion what kind of housing would be the most suitable to their needs. And of course, in the cultural adequacy of housing is very, very important because each country has own history on our tradition, how you use the housing. Because housing and land are the most old subjects. I mean, the history of housing in Spain is going for 100 years, for many hundred years. So there is some traditions of how housing and housing policy in Spain has developed. And this is why when we are offering different solutions for addressing housing, very important that we take into account the cultural context and the tradition of the country. So really from one country to another, in one national context to another, the policies and the solutions will be very different depending really on the national priorities and also on the culture and tradition of this country.